All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We are joined by our buddy Anthony Tyler tonight. He is back to discuss his new book, Hunt Manual, Demonology and Forteana. So really looking forward to this discussion. We kind of hit on it a little bit last time when we had him on, but we were talking, I think, more about like UAPs and good versus evil and that kind of stuff last time. So you can go check that out. We actually have a Patreon episode with him from last time, actually the last couple times. So go check that out. Also, if you're interested, head on over to Patreon at patreon.com/MindEscapePodcast. For just $2 a month, you'll get exclusive guest episodes and segments. We've got a ton of stuff up there, and we'll do a short one with Anthony tonight as well. But I just uploaded ones with Rick Strassman, Matthew Clark, where we were discussing Eleusinian mysteries, Laird Scranton, Laura from Megalith Hunter, you name it. We've put a bunch up there, and we're going to keep putting stuff up there, so go check that out. Also find us on Discord. Also head on over to indrasweb.org. This is a social media platform we created to connect open minds. So if you like all the topics that we discuss on the podcast, head on over there, set up a profile. We are still working on trying to get that in the App Store. And also, if you are interested, we have a Mind Escape t-shirt to give away, which we will be giving away at the end of October. If you want to be entered to win, all you have to do is go to Apple Podcast, leave a 5-star review, take a screenshot of it, and email it to mindescapepodcast@gmail.com. We will pick a winner at the end of October. And we also have an awesome new merch store, so check that out. I have the link down below. And before we get started, Anthony's book will be out on Halloween. You can purchase it on Amazon. I have the link down below. Again, that is Hunt Manual, 21st Century Demonology and Forteana. So go check that out. But what's going on, Anthony? Welcome back on the show.
Hey, guys. Thank you very much for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Lots we could talk about. I've just currently kind of rounding home base, putting the final touches on the book at the time of recording this. So things will be, really looking forward to the release. And I don't know, I guess a good starting point for any listeners and such is the conversations we've had in the past on your podcast here are definitely good. They'll definitely play into, the stuff that we talk about now. Things like, the new book, Hunt Manual, definitely heavy motifs of good and evil, like the analysis of, and UFOs and UAPs, and goes into a lot more. We've talked about a little bit of, like the case of Annalise Michel and some of the like heuristic truths that could potentially be found in the superstitions of possession and things. And
before we get started with that, though, we were just talking about how most people don't know what Fortean or Forteana is. Right. And why don't you give us a little bit of a background of like Charles Fort and where all this research and stuff comes from?
Yeah. So, for anybody that doesn't know, Forteana or Fortean phenomena, it really comes like the biggest name that comes to mind for most people is John Keel, authored the Mothman prophecies and things. And but the originator of it all, Charles Fort, in the early 20th century, he basically, it's just he wrote the Book of the Damned and other things, and the Book of the Damned being not a book of demonology, but meant to be a metaphor for the unexplainable phenomena that's been damned from scientific study, because there's a limited understanding in the scientific field on whatever be the case, all unexplainable phenomena. We'll get into it more, but and so because of that, because there's a limited understanding, it's just been pigeonholed as superstition and other things. And sometimes things are just superstitious and don't make any sense, but other times it's genuinely the case where we have really strange things that are on record in a variety of different ways. And despite any sort of record being left, we don't really have any further answers to it. So it's not really so much about the answers so much as it is just developing more of an understanding and context of the fact that you know, in a sense, like everything exists on a scale of cosmic weirdness. You know, a lot of things are not that weird, and there's a tipping point where, well, you know, the things start to get very, very strange and surreal. And you
How
know,
do you think this
it,
stuff plays into like the evolution of consciousness? Because the way I have looked at it or researched, you know, from all the different episodes and people we've talked to and stuff like that, it seems like there's a pattern, and that pattern is superstition led to ritual. Even though there's still rituals today. Superstition led to ritual, ritual led to religion, religion led to philosophy, philosophy led to science, and kind of here we are today. So there is this like progression. Now we still have a lot of those things, right? People are still superstitious, people are still religious, people are still philosophizing, you know, like all that stuff still, you know, happens, but it just seems like there was at one point those were like the stepping stones to each other, at least from my perception.
yeah, yeah. You know, it's hard to say. There are, but I think the greatest context for all of this stuff is, hmm, there's a lot of different ways to start slicing this pie, and I think that the best place to probably start is just simply considering the scientific relevance of not only archetypes but the memes and the viral nature in which symbols kind of incubate and um, are exchanged between hosts, so to speak. And but so there's a lot to be said for that initially, but more to the point, why? And you know there's it's to really cut to the chase, I think that it has to do with um things like you look into some of the most well, I guess the best place to start is you always have to look at empiricism first and foremost, and you can let that kind of lead you outward, but you have to start with your boots on the ground and looking at the unexplainable, Forteana at large, but especially demonology. Just the more we talk, the more they'll go hand in hand. And I'm not saying that unexplainable phenomena is inherently evil, but we'll get there. But it seems that for example, with things like sleep paralysis and epilepsy, some things that we've talked about a little bit in the past, these laid really solid groundwork for superstitions and spiritual ideas that still stand the test of time, despite their rudimentary underpinnings. Like, to get more specific, like we know so much of the science behind something like sleep paralysis, but we don't know why all of those things happen. What is going on with those hallucinations, and why does it get so surreal and bleed into the paranormal on record time and time again? No one can really say. The same thing with temporal lobe epilepsy. We know what epilepsy is and we know how it affects the individual, but what goes on during those intense, good temporal lobe epilepsy specifically, those events that become like essentially like out of body, borderline psychedelic experiences, whether they're good or bad. We don't know what's going on there either. We don't know. And
What about
we don't know anything about dreams, so that would be the place to start.
What
Exactly.
about sleep paralysis too? Because it's something we've discussed a decent amount on the show. Our buddy Lee Adams, who we've had on a bunch, had bouts throughout his life with sleep paralysis and encounters with these entities and things like that. And I know it's big in for people in the UAP UFO communities to talk about too. And some people don't want to talk about it because they think it's just like trying to be, their experiences are trying to be explained away by some sort of scientific thing. But I would argue that maybe that's the vehicle for some weird thing to happen, and not necessarily look at it as a way to explain it. Like, oh, here's this, physical phenomenon. That's it. Like that could be, something, that happens where it does alter your consciousness, that puts you in touch with something else, right? Or something
Right.
like that, something metaphysical. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case, but I'm just saying, like, I don't think people really think about it like that. I think they just think it like it's like a threat to their narrative or something,
And it doesn't have to be. um, so if you look at these things, like we've talked about before a little bit, Valet mentioned It talks about the fact that with this unexplainable phenomena, the human experience, the witness, seems to be some sort of completion of a circuit, and I think that there's a lot of weight to that. But what is instigating the our piece of the circuitry? You look at things like some of these medical underpinnings, sleep paralysis and epilepsy, for examples. The reason that these things are, or like sleep paralysis specifically, as a matter of fact, the reason that this is happening is there's some sort of intense jam of the nervous system, and in layman's terms, and it has to do with our sensory processing and our circadian rhythms, and the body shutting down in incongruently with the mind and things. And when that happens, you start projecting a map of your own body essentially outward, but that really only explains like the initial underpinnings. Again, it doesn't explain what happens from then on out. But it's interesting because again, it all has to do with underlying stress, and you got to look at the nervous system of the human being like a sponge, because it very much is so.
Have you ever had a sleep paralysis episode?
I've had a couple, but it's been I was a child and they weren't as intense. It was like definitely genuine sleep paralysis, but in terms of the experience, but I never really had anything specifically paranormal happen. No,
because I've only had two experiences, and they were both, I think, 3 and 4 years ago. One of them was after a long camping trip where I didn't sleep and we were using psychoactive compounds. And I came home to catch up on sleep before, I had to make my next move to, drive. And yeah, it felt like I was being pulled back into the bed. I couldn't move. I was like paralyzed. And then I was seeing all sorts of weird visions, but it was like planets and things like in like weird stars and things like that. It wasn't necessarily like entities like people keep talking about. And then my second experience was during the daytime, and I didn't get much sleep the night before. And again, I was sitting on my couch. I felt like I was being pulled back into my couch, and a white light like flooded over me, and I couldn't move. And the more I tried to struggle, the more it like pulls you back, and you almost just have to give in to it for it to stop, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like you have to like ease up. Like the more you fight it, the more it's going to pull you down, like you just have to give into it. And then it seemed to fade away after that, from my experience. And I don't know if that sounds traditional to anybody, but those were my experiences with it. And I know it was sleep paralysis because I was paralyzed. I would assume that that's, yeah. The weird thing though, and I don't know if you can speak to this, I've heard like Dr. Matthew Walker talking about this kind of stuff and trying to explain it, saying you're going to dream even if you haven't slept. So at some point it's going to catch up with you and you're going to get into that state even if you haven't gone to bed. So I don't know if that's the catalyst for that, or if it's, like you said, circadian rhythms or melatonin, something happening in your brain or whatever. But
yeah, I think the big connection is the being overtired, because I hear that a lot from a lot of people. So
yeah, and overtired, essentially boiling down to an accumulation of stress, most certainly. As I mean, there are studies to show that people who suffer from sleep paralysis are more apt to have, to be highly neurotic. And that's not a dig on anybody. I'm neurotic as well. But like, the agoraphobia.
Everybody's neurotic to a certain point,
Exactly. So, and I mean, and if you don't handle that neuroticism, at least somewhat effectively, then your cup will overfloweth. And then things start to happen, whether it just be crazy dreams or just simple restlessness, or maybe
why do you think some people's are negative?
Maybe start seeing things.
Why do you think some people's sleep paralysis things are negative, and some, like mine, seemed kind of positive? It was almost like the first one was like a psychedelic vision.
This guy went on an adventure.
It was weird. I'm not gonna lie. It almost like it felt like an epiphany, like I was being shown something, but what I was being shown didn't make any sense to me. If that makes sense, I don't know if it does, but and then the second one. Like I said, it was just like a white light. So they weren't like negative entities, or like I know our buddy Lee's they're almost like nightmares, so, or these people that experience these entities over their bed, or what's that old hag's disease, or
And then there's the Hat Man. There's the Shadow Man.
Dude, that's exactly like the show we were just talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's in that show. I think we were talking about this before, maybe with you, or maybe it was just a dream I had. I don't
know. But you asked a specific question.
I was saying, why do you think some people's experiences are negative with like nightmares, and then maybe mine wasn't intense enough or something, but mine almost seemed more like a pleasant experience or like a dream or something. But I was paralyzed for sure.
Well, I think that given the relationship to like altered states of consciousness in general here, the psychedelic is not a bad comparison to be made here. And I think that there is a bit of like a purgative aspect to these things where, come what may, and things that are trying to get out will get out. And if you've cleaned house already, then you might not have, there are certain, because I guess this is the point in the long run, at least initially speaking, is like there are certain biological control methods that we can look into, certain biological points of research, but launching points. But after that, that's where things start to get, once you get into the imaginal, not the imaginary, but the imaginal, the psychical, the physics of the psyche. Things are they're always trying to, whether it be dreams or anything else. Once you step into that ground, if you haven't done some sort of purge process, then it's going to happen. It's like what happens when you drink some ayahuasca tea,
Yeah, I mean, obviously, most people that have listened to our show that we've talked about that a lot of times, and kind of people that describe these bad trips are usually people that just haven't. They have something going on in their life that they haven't dealt with or something like that, and it kind of comes out. So you're saying it can be something similar within this dream or sleep paralysis state where it's some issue that they haven't been dealing with to that point, and it comes out through that experience. I mean, I guess that makes sense for sure if that is what is happening. But the mind's just so weird, and as Maurice mentioned, we don't really know what's going on with dreams and nightmares and stuff. Since we are getting closer to Halloween, maybe we should shift to some more demonology.
My Lord, this is perfect to think about right before bed.
Because I mean, the whole sleep paralysis thing is as natural a segue as any, because it's a strange middle ground where I don't think that people who experience something like sleep paralysis are being are encountering demons or something so straightforward like that. But I do think that strange things happen, and ultimately, we can flesh this out more as we talk, but, just some initial groundwork here. It really does seem that the imaginal structures, that we're starting to talk about more, complete that Valayan circuitry that we're talking about. John Keel himself called this Fortean phenomena. He said that in many ways, at least more often than not, they represent omens. In the way that the Mothman seemed to foreshadow the collapse of the Silver Bridge.
I mean, I will say that first one that I had that first did feel something like I was being shown something with like there was like a big star and like a little star behind it, and I'm trying to figure out, is this like Grateful Dead Dark Star? What's going on here? I just don't know. But
he didn't write a song afterwards.
But yeah, I think that there's something to that. I mean, again, I'm not really well versed in all the Fortean stuff, as or at least as much as you or some of the other people we've had on the show. But I think that if anybody claims that these weird things are just coincidences, I think that that's definitely short-sighted, because it does feel like there's something to it. Now, I mean, again, I don't have any answers, but I have experienced weird things. So,
yeah, like I think both can. I think both exist on a continuum, both being just very simple, basic medical sleep paralysis, and then with certain preconditions, like a variety of preconditions that essentially amount to a really intensive stress and pressure, like physically building up in your nervous system. Things can go haywire and provide some sort of proverbial bottle for a genie. Sometimes these things are simply just projections of the psyche, and other times I think that, at least theoretically, in rare cases, there could very well be something on the other side, but I don't think that's always the case. And I think then, and that's a statement that I would make across the board with all these things, the further we get into, because where do you guys want to go next?
No, I mean, this is kind of what Maurice and I were fighting over. We got in a fight kind of last night at the end of the episode we did last night, because we did like all ancient Greek megalithic structures, and then the classical architecture and everything. But then at the end, we got into a whole debate about like gods and goddesses and stuff, and I was like, where are the gods? Where are these gods and goddesses? Where are these beings, these entities, and whatever? And the only explanation I have is altered states of consciousness, whether it be sleep paralysis, psychedelic experiences, meditation, all of them. I would say that psychedelics is the most fascinating one, in the sense that it's the only thing that you can do to interact with the physical world in a waking state. All the other ones require you to kind of be either, even meditation, you're awake, but you're not really fully there, so.
Yeah. And there's something to be said. This is something that no one really has any of the answers to, but I definitely make strides to just kind of sift through in Hunt Manual a little bit. The strange middle ground that you find on historical record, between, you would call like hallucination or entrancement, whether it be an individual or on a mass scale, and what I would call transphysical phenomena. Because it does seem to be, in very rare cases, the more you look into things, the more that some things just come out of nowhere from our vantage point. That doesn't mean they come out of nowhere to begin with, but so there's a lot of woo, that you can find in the paranormal, and a lot of this that I go into with Hunt Manual, because Dive Manual, the book prior, had a little bit of this Fortean stuff, and it was very esoteric. And this book is kind of flipped. There's still a lot of esotericism in there, but now it's a real dive or a hunt, if you will, into like the paranormal and things horrific and stuff. There's.
So what's your hypothesis? Do you have a hypothesis for? I mean, not to like ruin the book if that's the end point, but do you have like a hypothesis of why people experience this? I mean, because I think even the last time we were on the, you were on the show, I think I even mentioned this idea, like when you're running up the stairs when you're a kid and turn the lights off in the basement, and you get this feeling like something's behind you, but that is in your mind. There's nothing behind you. You know what I'm saying? So,
or is there?
So what do you think? Like, do you have a hypothesis for like why, are these like epigenetic ghosts or epigenetic, things of the past that are still haunting us, or like what do you think's going on?
I mean, in some ways, that's why I wrote a book, because it's a hard thing to just explain in one sentence. But what I can say is that there's, again, nobody has the full answers. But if anything, I'm trying to just like help build some more serious groundwork here to some of these crazy, interesting topics. And, I think it boils down to the fact that it starts with symbols as, because again, for anybody that is unaware or doesn't remember, the idea of a meme is something to the psyche that genes are to the physical body. And if you look at symbols in that way, archetypes being what is intrinsically represented in our psyche, and memes being what we exchange between each other. So the memes are the physicalized aspect of it, essentially. But when you get into, symbols essentially as some sort of living exchange of consciousness in that way, something that in turn affects our biology and adaptation process on very literal physical levels, well, I mean, the boundaries between the subjective and objective start to get blurred a bit more. Because, I mean, obviously you could see, it's the whole Kantian Copernican model, which sounds very obvious, but it's important to, emphasize in conversations like this. There are things, there's objectivity, and then there are things as the human being perceives them, the subjective. And, I mean, I think sometimes people get caught up in like trying to understand which is one or the other, and they certainly bleed into each other. Sometimes you can't really tell the difference, and that's where a lot of in some cases that's how you know that you're having a mental breakdown, but in other cases that's that's the definition of a mystical experience or an unexplainable one. And we've talked about this as well. So to a little bit of a callback, we've talked about like Sasquatch and things, and about how I don't discredit people going out and looking for Sasquatch. I think that that's a fine endeavor, and I think that you could probably find some things out there, but I don't think that Sasquatch is an actual living thing out there that breeds and has families and things. I think it has something more to do. The living
so
experience.
So there's no Harry and the Hendersons. Is this what you're telling me?
That is definitely what I'm telling you. Yeah. If anything,
popcorn chilling on the couch.
Yeah, that's a classic, though. Let's face it, that's a classic.
Yeah, gotta love it. But I don't think that I'm not one to discount the experiencer, but I don't think that I think at a certain point.
Yeah, I don't.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, man, I don't know. Some of those shows, and I mean this no offense to anybody, but it just seems like some of the Bigfoot stuff, some of the ghost stuff, and I'm not saying, because there is some stuff that I have, well, I shouldn't say that because I haven't seen anything that's been really that, people have hobbies, right? I just want to get this, like, people have hobbies. Like, I'm all for, like, kind of what you're saying, like, go do your thing. I'm not gonna like make fun of you or anything like that, but if you're telling me that this parrot, like I see online on forums and stuff like that, it's just pareidolia. Like, people are like, look at this Sasquatch and and it's like a bird in a tree or something. It's like things like that. It's like what are we doing at this point? Again, the Sasquatch thing, like the most credible thing out there is what, the Gimlin video or whatever. Isn't that the most that people point to? Is like, if there was something real. Okay, so let's say that's the best evidence that there is. Okay, the guy's best friend who lives down the street from him said he was the dude in the suit. Like I'm just saying, like, why would that guy make that up? He's like, I have nothing to gain from so it's like, at this point, what are we doing? And you're saying search for it. It's like searching for, like, ghost hunters. That's do your thing. I'm not making fun of it. Is it my thing? No. But I think it's completely different than, let's say, like a UFO thing where military people are seeing them. There's radar data, there's sensory data, there's videos, there is actual stuff. Now, there's not a ton of credible evidence because there is a lot of, tomfoolery going on with that too. But I would say that's where I think the UFO, UAP stuff differs from the Bigfoot and the ghost stuff. There's just not as much stuff you can hang your hat on with the other ones, in my opinion.
Those are good points, but I will say that the UFO thing is it kind of exists on like a higher echelon. It's naturally received. It's in a position to be of more interest to begin with.
Let me ask
to
you
the
this:
government.
Have you seen a weird thing that you can't explain in the sky?
Yes,
I know you have. That was a trick question.
We all have.
Maurice has. I for sure have. Okay, and I was in a normal state of consciousness. Now, have I seen a Bigfoot or a ghost? No. Have you? Have you seen a Bigfoot or a ghost?
I have not.
Okay, Maurice, have you seen a Bigfoot or a ghost?
Nope. Just
okay,
Harry.
Well, we've all been in the woods a million times, and Anthony, you grew up in Alaska. I would assume if anybody's seen a Sasquatch, it would have been you. And again, does that mean that nothing like that? No, we know Gigantopithecus existed. Like there could have been, again, some epigenetic memory from us living alongside them a long time ago, and it's just built into our DNA to think or like reminisce or have these maybe fleeting moments. But again, I'm not trying to diminish anybody, and people can believe what they want. If you listen to our show, we're pretty open-minded people. So if somebody brought some compelling evidence forward, I would change my mind if I felt like it was enough to change my mind. But I've never seen anything that was like, wow, that's shocking to me, other than some of the UFO stuff and having seen weird stuff myself. So
well, I think that there is some pretty compelling evidence out there, at the very least, for the paranormal. And I think that the only reason that it doesn't seem like it is because you really have to dig deep. And there's some stuff that I talk about in the book. I'll get into with you guys a little bit as well. But to make a point quickly and move forward, I think that it's, the paranormal, nothing paranormal truly causes any sort of potential threat to national security. And I also think, I think there's something to be said for the amount of people who see UFOs. So that is a good point. But I also think that, these things like ghost shows and things like anything you find on TV, like ghost shows are just as much BS as Ancient Aliens. And it's all just first and foremost news, or not news headlines, but it's just dollar signs. And most of that stuff is staged. I mean, specifically with the paranormal stuff. I think if you really pin most of those people against a wall, like at a party or something, they had a couple drinks in them, I don't even think they would hold the line very seriously. It's kind of, I look at those paranormal shows like WWE wrestling. It's theatrical. I don't
Again,
take
entertain yourself. If you want to go out in the woods or look for Bigfoot or ghosts, again, do your thing. I'm not saying it's like a waste of time. If you find entertainment in it and you like it, go do it. Whatever. There's shit that I'm interested in, and people are probably like, I don't, care about this or whatever. So, yeah, I'm all about doing what you want to do. I just think that if we're talking about like objective truth, yeah, I mean, I don't think enough people are aware of their own cognitive biases, or, like you said, people are willing to go along with things from like an entertainment standpoint. And it just seems like they're participating, but they're not really aware of that aspect of it. Right.
Right. Yeah, there's a huge angle and aspect of myth making here, and some of that is intentional, and some of that is in this sort of living mythological narrative, and this kind of Jungian projection, and us sort of sifting through our own projections. Like you look at things like, so there's a lot of like genuinely interesting, unexplainable phenomena, and but there's, for every bit of interesting data, there's so much more that's just silly, like Owlman. I talked about this with Justin Otto on his podcast. We were having a little bit of a jab at Owlman, because I mean, realistically, this is the Cornish Owlman in England in the 70s. I mean, it was just a giant owl. Like
it was a Mothman's brother.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's kind of the inside joke too, is because Mothman could be an owl, but there was a lot of weird stuff going on in Point Pleasant, and like the story of the Owl Man is literally just a giant owl the size of a man. That's the only thing that makes it cryptid to begin with. So like, if people just thought it was
creepy in itself, why do you even need to turn it into a man? Like, just the fact that there's an owl, a 5-foot owl, I would take a dump in my pants, if I saw
that. And it probably wasn't even that big anyway. And there's so many stories like that. Like there's 10 different Nessie variations now.
That one, same thing. Like people still think that one video, it's like a toy in the water, that black and white video. It's a toy in the water, and people still like post that, like, look at this, it's the Loch Ness monster. like, how do you expect me to take that seriously? I can't.
Well, they just saw the Loch Ness, bro.
Yeah, that was another thing going around recently.
Morris believes that, so
I believe everything. I don't question anything.
There's so in writing this book a little bit. There's I'll tell you guys some stories that I came across. One,
give me some, try and turn me a little on this. Like tell me something that you think will change my mind a little here. Okay, and first I'll very briefly tell you guys a fun story that won't make you change your mind. Now, it is a book called The Goblin Universe that I was not inspired by, but at the end of, or like, deep in the process of writing this book, I kind of came across it, and it was exciting a little bit because it's an old book, and it's basically a rough draft by a Fortean investigator called Bob Holliday, and it was published in the 80s or something, and it was a rough draft that was published because he ended up passing away, and so it's a bit rough, and you can't even find copies of it anymore, but you can find, they're like $600, and you can't get a digital copy, but you can find people who have talked about it, and there's like podcasts that go into detail about it. So and there's one story in the book where and this is kind of like tongue-in-cheek, they weren't sure if this was going to work, but the whole premise of the Goblin Universe is very similar to what we're talking about here, except not as fleshed out, with this whole idea of
this motif of unexplainable phenomena and the Jungian shadow complex and so forth. And so Bob Holliday and two Catholic priests, Scottish Catholic priests, actually go out on a rowboat to the middle of Loch Ness in the 70s or 80s or something and attempt to exorcise the loch of the spirit of Nessie, because they were their hypothesis was that, kind of similar to what we're talking about here again, that these things don't exist on a physical level. They might have some sort of transphysical trickery to them in like a similar like hypnosis, sort of like a hypnagogic psychedelic sort of way, but really these things are mimetic entities that exist in the collective psyche and complete this Valayan circuit that we're talking about. And so he says Nessie is this mimetic spirit that lives in Loch Ness, so we're going to go out and exorcise it. And it did not work. People still see Nessie. It's
sometimes it's like a bunch of sturgeon or something, like, sometimes it's some otters, or it's these different pictures, like. And again, I'm not trying to explain away everything. I do think that there's weird things in the world, but I think sometimes we put too much stock in the ones that have very little evidence. Like, it's almost like a willingness to, or a wantingness to believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. But again, don't argue with me that it's some sort of objective truth that you discovered this thing when there's really no proof,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. If you're going to look into this stuff at all, first and foremost, you have to be willing to, just right off the bat, separate the myth making, whether it be conscious or unconscious, from the stuff that we just don't understand yet. And so there are some cases like, for example, there was a poltergeist, the Church Street poltergeist in St. Catharines, Canada, in the mid 70s. And this was a 28-day event, and this is something that you don't really hear talked about that often. It does float around a little bit with researchers, but it's really not like a big. But it was at the time. So let me set the stage first before going into the details of the events a little bit. Now, this was this surrounded a family, and police got involved, and there was a police report written about it and about the ongoing events. And the confusion that the police experienced. And it was meant to be a very hush-hush thing. No one was interested. The family's never gone on record. No one was interested in making a big deal about it. But somehow it leaked to the local press. And it was so outrageous and interesting because it was a police report that specifically detailed poltergeist phenomena. It made its way all the way to Johnny Carson and, became like a real big event. But to this day, the family has been very, it's very much the opposite of something like the Amityville Horror, where Bob and I can't remember their names, but the Warrens came in, and that very much seems to have been just a whole, essential fabrication. I mean, if you really want to be analytical about it, the whole Amityville Horror thing. But something like this, the Church Street poltergeist. So police come in after reports of disturbance. There's all sorts of commotion coming from the apartment and these things because it's in an apartment complex. And long story short, police start to witness, and the sergeant writes the police report. I mean, you can find the actual report online. You can find interviews with these police officers. None of them are paranormal enthusiasts. They never have been. And, they start to witness the classical poltergeist phenomena. They look into all the different angles. They look into all the odds and ends that, just due diligence, like looking into the structure of the apartment complex, interviewing the owner and all the neighbors, and intensively interviewing the family and things. And they see this kid getting hurled around the room, and they see things getting hurled around the room, and there's no way to explain it. And this happens. They get hordes of people outside. It becomes a whole event, like I said. And the real cherry on top there is because there's a lot of data there's a lot of material that they talk about. But again, in the police report himself, the sergeant says, I have no other explanation for any of these events except for the fact that this kid is being affected by the spirit of a poltergeist. And there's one instance in specific where, because the police are coming to routinely check up on the family at this point because they don't know what's happening, and they also are concerned of the media attention. And there's also some neighbors around, and so there's like a handful of people in their living room. Some of them are sitting on the seat. One of those people sitting down is a police officer, And mind you, there's some other police officers in the room looking at the people sitting there. This is all very important because during the conversation, the chair, the couch levitates off the ground, feet into the air. Everyone is privy to it. And the police officers go on record talking about it and everything.
When did this happen?
And this was in the mid 70s. Okay. And again, you can find the police report online, and you can find the interviews with some of these officers. And after 28 days, it just stopped. You know, no one knows why. And there's other really heavily documented cases like, you know, some of these are more recent than others, but,
well,
you know,
do you
a
think
lot of
if I could add that, do you think that something like that, again, not to add explanations or anything like that, but do you think that there could be something at play, almost like you said that happened in Canada?
Yes.
Like some sort of Canadian version of MK Ultra or something like that, where people were unaware that they, you know, weren't fully there or something like that, you know?
Anything's possible. See, this is a big point that I'm trying to make, just like with this book in general, is at a certain point you got to stop looking for, you know, we're asking the wrong questions, and you got to stop looking for the answers and just try and focus on forming a proper question. And that starts with, you know, really sifting through what's the difference between the hearsay and something like a police report. Because, you know, I got a police report that talks about Sasquatch in the book. I got police reports that talk about possession and,
well, I want to be clear. I think
things.
people see weird things. I'm not saying that they don't. I just, again,
right.
You know, I think we already covered the fact that physically there's never been any like bones or anything other than Gigantopithecus skulls and molars and stuff like that. So
we have an episode. I don't know what the number is, but
we do with our good buddy Jay Lady.
Hey, if you want to get into it and you want to take,
he records like frequencies and sounds. I mean, he's doing some interesting stuff, no doubt. I wanted to have somebody like him on that actually takes interesting approaches to this stuff. But I'm going to walk away again with my hypothesis I already laid out there, which is a common one for people that obviously understand that weird stuff happens, but there's no real physical explanation for it. So, I mean, but you bring up a good point. I mean, weird stuff does happen, and we do try and find physical explanations. You know, that's what we do ever since Thales, you know, started making physical observations that turned into science. That's all we've been really doing, right? You know, instead of the gods doing this or the gods doing that, it turned into, oh, there's a real, you know, physical explanation for this thing. So I think that's where we're stuck, and consciousness-wise in humanity is kind of that scientific mind based in philosophy. So I would say that that's probably why we're at the point you're talking about, where that's the way we look at things.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the issues, it's not a problem, it's just an obstacle with the scientific method, is that, I don't know, and maybe it's more human nature than even the scientific method per se, but, you know, we really have a hard time with like incompleteness and incongruencies, and, you know, people, if there's, you know, just all the different, you know, there's missing pieces in physics and all these different things, and it drives people absolutely bonkers. But and it would be great to know all those things, but I mean, at a certain point, sometimes you just have to wait. Like that's, you know, that's so much of life. It's if anyone who's ever grown a plant knows that it doesn't matter how bad you want that plant to grow, that right now you just got to wait. And like, I think the same can be said with the scientific method. Like, some things we aren't going to understand yet, and hopefully we will at some point. And it's important to keep trying, but if you try and pigeonhole an answer too soon, not only is it going to be wrong, but, you know, it's going to bring the whole house of cards crumbling eventually.
Yeah, you know, I think if most scientists just, you know, I mean, I'm sure a lot of them do. A lot of them have studied philosophy, but there is a good portion I've seen where either they forgot it or they don't practice it. But having that philosophy of science, the idea that it's an ever-evolving picture, and knowing that what you're doing is going to contribute to this, like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up this never-ending, you know, mountain, you know, and just accepting that, as opposed to being like, I'm the person that's going to discover this and it's going to change everything and it's going to be known forever. Like, that's not going to happen. That's not science.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that's kind of part of the problem. What you're talking about is like this. I think the wanting to do that does push things along, but how much does it affect that pivot at a critical moment to something else? You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. And, you know, I don't know, to kind of bring this home plate a little bit, especially for any listeners, we're talking about all sorts of different stuff, but I really think it all ties together very specifically. And, you know, reason being, and again, this is a strong running theme, probably the biggest running theme throughout Hunt Manual, but the idea that this unexplainable phenomena has, at least from the human's point of view, everything to do with the Jungian shadow. You know, that which we do not understand or have, or that which we do not understand and is not readily accessible to our conscious mind. And you know, the best way to wrap your head around psychological components like that is obviously symbols, archetypes, and you know, because for anybody that does not remember, I've probably mentioned it before, but the four basic components, the Jungian components of the psyche, are the mother, the father, the logos, and the shadow. And you know, the shadow at its worst is I'm not sure what the it would be of Mephistopheles. I'm not sure what that would, Mephistophelian. I don't know how you would say that, but you know, Mephistopheles, the Faustian devil, that gives Faust limitless power when he summons him up, and then so that would be the worst end of the shadow. The best end of the shadow being Virgil in Dante's Divine Comedy, who is the pagan Roman poet that is not a devil, but he's not divine. He's not allowed in heaven, but he guides Dante through hell and purgatory. But there's a lot of symbolism I could unpack in there. But I mean, essentially, the whole point of the shadow. I mean, there's a lot that we could open up here, but if it encompasses, you know, everything which we do not really understand yet about ourselves and the world, there's going to be some good in there, but there's also going to be some really nefarious stuff. Like, you don't necessarily need to use the word evil, but maybe predatory, you could certainly say, whether it be in the archetypal or literal sense. There are definitely destructive aspects of the shadow, and so I think there's something to be said for the fact that, you know, I certainly don't have like the classical Christian idea of there's just divine and demonic. I certainly think that there's you know, at least archetypally speaking, there's that divine and demonic, and also that gray area that like the Islamic jinn, or something similar to, you know, just the Greek word daemon for just spirit in general. So that,
yeah, I mean, Socrates
that
used to
area.
talk to his own personal daemon.
Right.
So, I mean, well, at least that's what Plato wrote about Socrates.
An
Maybe it was
story.
Plato. Maybe it was Plato. But I also want to point out one more thing about science. Is science is really good at explaining how, right? You know, but it's not good at all really explaining why. And I think the why is what's more interesting to us, right? As human beings, like, is their purpose. Is purpose something that we created ourselves? You know, that's something I definitely think about all the time, because that is probably, other than what happens when we die, you know, is there a purpose? And if not, do we create our own purpose? Does it matter? You know, that kind of a thing. So
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. You know, and some people say that you wouldn't really have purpose without religion or spirituality. I think that might be a little bit of an overstatement, well, at least in today's society, but we wouldn't have had it to begin with without spirituality and religion, because that's for sure. But I don't think you have to be, you know, there's that, like, I guess it's just like a saying. I don't know if it comes from like some sort of study that was out there or whatever, but there's probably some studies involved. But they say that, you know, people who are like atheist and like materialist scientific atheists are generally more, you know, pessimistic and that people with religion have.
Oh, for sure, man. I mean,
Yeah.
I watch enough science videos and science communicators and educators that they are definitely a lot more nihilistic and almost like hopeless in some way when you listen to them talk. Like a Richard Dawkins, like, oh, give me a break. You know, like,
yeah, we've talked about that.
You know, and I would say though, I would say even though like you're talking about like purpose too, like maybe even evolution itself has purpose in it in the sense that we're trying to survive, right? So just that alone is purpose. Now, does it go beyond that? Is there some bigger picture purpose? I think that that's what most people think about, but you're right about the whole, you know, tone within that mindset. It's very depressing to listen to, especially.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think that there's a you know, I think that as long as you don't think that, you know, as long as you think that the human being has some sort of free will, no matter how nuanced and no matter how much you have to maybe fight for some of that free will in your own mind, if you think that you have some sort of autonomy, then you know, I think it's pretty evident that there is no set meaning or like purpose to life whatsoever other than you know, you make it. And I think that to some people it seems anticlimactic, and to some people that seems like terrifying, and I don't really know why for either of them, because I mean a blank canvas is pretty exciting to me. There's a lot of potential there. You know, it's really just perspective in the long run, I guess. But you know, I don't know. There's science can definitely jade you, but I don't necessarily think that religion or spirituality always is like necessarily an antidote for that sort of pessimism either, because and maybe if it is, it's at the overcompensation. You know, because maybe when people become less pessimistic, they become really, really I don't know what's just the politest way to put it. You know, people get too wooey, they get too far out there, and then some people get really, you know, hellfire and brimstone with it.
The woo's fun though. I look, I understand from like a cognitive bias standpoint. I understand the woo, you know, and wanting the pareidolia and wanting to find the connections and putting these pieces together and it being fun. It's almost like a puzzle, you know. And but I think you can go down a road where you're convincing yourself that this is the answer, this is the truth. Maybe it's your truth, but again, I mean, for me personally, I'm always looking for that thing outside of me. Is there something that connects us all together? What is this thing, this objective thing? Does that exist? You know, that's just my own journey, but I know people like to argue. I would just say, if you're into that kind of stuff, just don't argue with people, you know, just do your thing, right. You know? And
yeah.
So I don't know.
You know, along the lines of like all of this unexplainable phenomena and stuff, I remember I mentioned it before because I got a kick out of the fact that Maurice said it was his favorite movie, or one of them at least, Donnie Darko. It's worth bringing up again here, yeah, because it's a great movie, and that without biting on it, because this is a motif that we've, you know, explained that a recurring theme in a lot of other people's research. So it's not just from this movie, but I mean, for whatever it's worth, like this whole idea of unexplainable phenomena being like an omen of sorts. There's some sort of, you know, even if it exists outside of you in some way, it's clearly in some way interacting with projectional aspects of yourself in similar ways to dreams. I mean, that's exactly what Frank was for Donnie. It was on the time scale continuum. Frank was this weird karmic haunting of the whole situation. And I really think that it's. So I don't think this is where, as I've used this phrase before, it's not where the trail of breadcrumbs ends. This is where it begins. But I very much think that you can look at something like, if you have a truly unexplainable sighting, anything cryptozoological, paranormal, whatever, you know, there's a few takeaways. There's very few takeaways that you could truly have with it. But for one, I think. You know, sometimes people trick themselves. You know, we know that eyewitness accounts can be fuzzy and stuff like that, but there's a lot of other times when you're looking into these cases where people just see astonishing things, and we don't have any better explanation for it, but we know that they see these things, and I think that if we're going to say, so if there's no physical evidence, then let's say that it's not physical. Like it's the whole argument that we've made, and that you elaborated well with Sasquatch and everything else. So if it is there, if it's still there on some level, then like how do you quantify it? What's like the metric? How is it? Why? Why? Because everything has some sort of purpose, no matter how small. And I really think that these things, like, I have a sentence in the book where I equate. This is going to rile up some other feathers, but we've talked about this in the past as well, so you go listen to our conversation there. But I think that in many ways you could describe something like a UFO as something like a flying poltergeist. I think that there is weird phenomena that can take on, if it's not physical, we certainly perceive it to be physical, and it interacts with us in a way that we perceive to be physical. But I don't think they're non-existent. But even with the UFO, I'm still pretty skeptical about how physical these things are, because for me, I've looked into the data of a lot of different unexplainable stuff, all the stuff that we've talked about, and you can find very compelling, for all again, for all the silly cases you could find at least a few compelling cases for just about anything you look into if you dig deep enough, whether it's Sasquatch or anything else. And the same as with the UFO. So people can say, well, how could the UFO be on radars and all these other things? And as far as I'm concerned, from my vantage point, I think it's the same way that a Sasquatch leaves footprints in the ground, or a quote unquote poltergeist slings a kid across the room constantly, or lifts a chair, or the same reason that people get conjunctivitis in their eyes when they see Mothman, and the same reason that 70,000 people witnessed the Virgin Mary, at Fatima in Portugal. You can go on. And also, for anyone that would like to follow up on any of this kind of like projectional paranormal type stuff, Michael Talbot's book, The Holographic Universe, is definitely on this same kind of nod for sure. It goes in some different directions, but definitely not entirely. I would definitely consider it like a bit of an inspiration for Hunt Manual for sure. I mean, The Holographic Universe is a book I see tossed around and recommended to this day. Is definitely a classic. Have you guys read it?
No.
Oh man, you really should, both of you. You'd absolutely love it. It's a really good one.
Yeah, no, I'll check it out. I know I see people talking about it all the time, but
it's been a long time since I read it, but that was a book that I've read a couple times, and it was a big inspiration to me when I first read it. Yeah.
I mean, I would push back a little bit on the UFO stuff being the same thing as like Bigfoot and all that, only because well, first of all, let's get this out of the way. I think all people that are like, oh, I'm a nuts and bolts UFO guy, or oh, I'm a consciousness UFO, or I'm somewhere in the middle, or I believe both. Everything is consciousness based, because everything we observe, measure, experience is all directly through our consciousness. So technically, everything is consciousness based. So I don't know where this argument came from separating, like, unless you don't believe there is actual consciousness and this is just some sort of, extra perception of our nervous system or something, then I don't know how you could make that argument differentiating things between the material world and the non-material world, because everything would be the same based on what consciousness is. So
that's a good point.
You could make the argument that there is like a physical, like I can touch this desk, but my thoughts in my mind are different, right? So what is that? You can't really quantify that, or at least we can't yet.
But what people, I think, those are really good points. What people really want to know when they're talking about it, physical or non-physical, is like, the tree falling in the forest argument. If a UFO crashes in the forest and no one is around to see it, then does it actually crash? And I think that that's a question worth asking. You know, in that Valayan circuitry motif. And I'm not, I'm, you know, I'm not, you know, opposed to the idea that, you know, I do think, for one, that there are extraterrestrials out there, you know, and it's certainly possible that they could be visiting us at least occasionally.
Well, I mean, statistically, it's probable that there's definitely life out there. So, I mean,
certainly.
Even if you're a math person, you know, like that, you have to at least take those odds.
Right. But it's a different question, how likely of that they're actually visiting us, which I still, you know, you could still toss that into the equation. I don't think we have to completely throw that out. Just like I don't think we, you know, because all of these things, it's myth making, right? And I'm not saying that they're non-existent, but as soon as you look into a topic like the UFO, you automatically have to look at all of the different accumulative factors, like, you know, there's just reports at large, you know, everyone from you know, like a government pilot to a layman just seeing something in the sky. You know, some of these things are going to be drones. Some of these things are just going to be like misidentified, whatever. Some of these things are going to be black budget government things. And some of these things are going to be genuinely unexplainable. And so, I mean, first and foremost, you got to separate all of those on a case-by-case basis. So, I mean, if you're talking about ufology as a whole, there are certainly physical things in there and non-physical things, but like, what is the core of it? What is the crux of this all? Like, is there a UFO flying around even when people aren't looking at it? And you know, how consistent is it? You
don't have to convince me, man. I wrote a blog about this specific thing on our website.
No,
I talk about like the Greek gods and equate it to like how people believed that there was these gods and they manipulated the weather and different, you know, physical phenomena and things like that. And people believe, you know, there is this like transition happening where you see like less people getting into religions, more people getting into like UFOs and spirituality and weirder things, right? So I think that there's like this alien of the gaps thing happening now where it's just something to believe in to fill that void that's there because people don't know what the next, you know, maybe all that stuff, you know, like religion and everything and the belief and things is tied to evolution somehow, and it creates this vehicle for us to like dangle a carrot in front of us. Or maybe there is something metaphysical happening, I don't know, but either way,
you hit the nail on the head. It's definitely one or the other or a combination of both. I think that plays a big part, though, the whole evolutionary angle.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, you see, like, you definitely see the superstitious thing go to the ritualistic thing going into religion going into philosophy going into science, and kind of here we are today. You know, is there going to be something even beyond science that's even more empirical than science at some point? I don't know. It'd be interesting to live in the future and figure that out. But
yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I like your take, man. I know, you know, you're open-minded, but you're trying to investigate these things. And I'm not trying to poo-poo anything or, you know, put anybody down that's into these things. But again, it's like, if you're going to argue for truth, I think you have to really examine all angles. And I don't think some of these people, for what it comes down to, for me, at least doing this podcast and looking at all these topics and having both mainstream stuff and, you know, fringe stuff and alternative stuff and everything kind of in the middle, I think you have to be honest with yourself is foremost. You know, like, be honest with yourself. Are you willingly going along with it, or is there some sort of confirmation bias happening or pareidolia? Or have you examined that aspect of your mind and really were honest with yourself and said, I still can't explain it given all these other factors? So I think that that's where I'm at on these things, is like, I want to believe. I know that sounds cliche, but at the same time, I'm not just going to go along with stuff either. I'm going to really question things and run through the paces with all that. So I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I like the term alien of the gaps because I think that whole God of the gaps motif is something that's I don't know, like it could come across as like just like an airy adage or something, but I think that there's a lot of poignancy to it. I even used the term "devil of the gaps" in the book there, and I think metaphysics of the gaps at large is a very worthwhile consideration, because I think that the whole of the gaps idea is essentially stabbing at the heuristic model, which is stabbing at the whole evolutionary, dangling carrot concept that you were talking about. And I think that that has everything to do with this discussion, Forteana included in that. And
well, I mean, I don't know if you could speak to the other, like the Forteana stuff, but I know like it's big in the UAP community, where people think that there is this presence, is this thing that's bringing us along in different ways, whether it be through creativity or some sort of metaphysical way, or through altered states of consciousness, whatever. I know that that's a big thought. I don't know if it's the same within the Forteana or the Fortean stuff, but
some people do consider like Sasquatch as like a wise man. Like it's like
a Harry Socrates or something.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Squashates.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess in some way they're like, with the idea of Sasquatch more being like a spirit of the wilderness, as like the Native Americans often considered it, because obviously a lot of different Native American cultures, and it's kind of the same motif with the Yeti in Tibet and things. But
how prevalent is that in the Native American? Do you know how many like tribes had Sasquatch myths? Or
I don't know the number, but I know that I have talked to enough people and read enough, specifically with the Pacific Northwest, where it was a common idea in Native American tradition. And I can't remember the name, but there's a friend of mine, Bob Antone. He's a bit of a Fortean guy himself, and he lives in the Washington area. He's really ingratiated naturally with one of the local Native American tribes. I cannot remember the name, but he was telling me specifically this elaborate mythology that the tribe has about Sasquatch, and how it kind of like, it's not like a primary like god or anything, but it's kind of considered like the gatekeeper of the forest almost. And there was two Sasquatches in a kind of yin and yang thing, and one was essentially peaceful and would kind of like, was like to help you find your way home and things like that, and the other one would torment you out there. So yeah, I mean, he does definitely, Sasquatch has his own
have you seen that newer Sasquatch documentary? I think it's on Hulu.
No, as much as we've talked about him here, I really don't. I'm
this one's not really about, I mean, it starts off seeming that way, but it gets into like this whole like Humboldt County thing happening with like growers and all these like myths, and like it builds into this thing, and then it becomes like an actual like murder mystery kind of a thing, and like Sasquatch is kind of involved. But then they do bring in that Gimlin guy who kind of debunks that aspect of it, so then it just becomes, not to spoil anything, I'm not going to give any details, but if you're interested, I think it's on Hulu. It's a Duplass Brothers production. I think they do pretty good. I think they made Wild Wild Country and some other documentaries that are pretty good. So
I know that name. I don't remember.
Yeah, the one guy, I think the one brother was on The League.
Yeah, he's the
main dude Duplass. Yeah, he also did the movies, the Creep movies.
He's the bad guy, I think, in season 2. Have you seen that movie or that show Goliath with Billy Bob Thornton? I don't know if you've seen that. He's in that too, I think. Anyways, but yeah, that it's not him though. They didn't make the doc. It's like this other guy who. It's
a production company.
The basis of the documentary is this guy. He was like 20 and he was in Humboldt County, like helping trim or something at this farm. And he hears this thing about this Bigfoot, like some guys came in. He's like, "Oh my God, Bigfoot came in and killed these other guys and everything." And he's tripping out on, I think he said he ate like mushrooms or something like that. So this guy's like tripping out.
Dang.
And then that sets off this platform, and he doesn't think about it for like years. And then he comes back to the case. Now he's like some like top journalist, and he's infiltrated like all these different, crazy stories that he's done, like undercover stuff. And he goes back and like looks at this case again, and it's just this insane case. It's definitely worth checking out. I mean, again, I don't think if you're into a physical Bigfoot, you might not like the ending, but
What's it called again?
I don't know. I gotta look at. Hold on, I'll find it right now. Um, but yeah, I think that I don't know. Again, I don't want to put anybody down because I do feel like if that's your passion and you find solace in it or it's fun or whatever, you know, do your thing. But at the same time, again, like I said, I've looked into these things and you know I haven't seen anything specifically, but it seems like the odds are stacked against it. So
It does. Um, you know, it's been mentioned before, but Keel.
it's just called Sasquatch.
Oh,
A real
very
think piece.
creative.
It's on Hulu and it's considered a true crime documentary.
Okay, okay. But yeah, Keel related Mothman to the Garuda, which I Vedic mythology gets confusing, but is like the essentially like a thunderbird that one of the gods rode, similar to like a chariot of the gods type thing. And I mean, like we've mentioned before, or I've mentioned with you guys, I think that there's like at least archetypal mimetic relevance, plenty of it, to the whole ancient aliens motif. I just don't think that it's extremely literal, nor do I think that like
For
aliens
sure,
built
aliens
pyramids
haven't.
or
They
anything.
for sure haven't built anything on Earth. Why would
Yeah,
use logic
exactly.
and reason? Why would anything traverse space and time, or come from a different dimension, and then build like Stonehenge? While it's impressive and it's an amazing human feat for the time, I don't think that like I said, if you're coming here some sort of advanced craft, why would you build that? That just doesn't make any sense.
Right. Occam's razor. People throw Occam's razor out the window sometimes here. Um,
No,
but
they just
but yeah,
destroy
you
it.
know, yeah, yeah, they just completely
Yeah,
destroy it. um, but you know, that's the fun or the one of the most interesting
Occam's
things
butter
about.
knife.
Very sharp.
Yeah. um, you know, Forteana and unexplainable phenomena. Um, you'd be hard pressed to find some of these. You know, I really look at them as like ongoing living mythology. You know, again, not exactly in the physical way, but in the fact that it's again still very ongoing. It's still very present in our minds and in our experiences. And um, I think you know I think that there's a great deal to be said for that. And um, I think. Man, there was an additional point I was going to
Can,
make, but I can't
can you
remember
can you
what that
give
one
me? Do you
was.
have any examples of stories that either make you believe in Bigfoot, ghosts? I know you already gave us a couple, but is there any one tale that you read about or heard where you're like, there might be something to this,
Mm,
as in like a physical world thing happening, not necessarily like a consciousness based or altered state of consciousness thing, but something like within the physical realm that you might think that there's some unexplained phenomenon that we just don't know about or something.
hmm. Yeah, I'll say a few different things. Firstly, I think um, you know, well, you can look at one case and it might be like, well, that was weird. I'm not sure what's going on there, but there's something interesting. And you look at like 10, 20 different cases, and if there's all something a little bit interesting going on there, and you start to really scratch your head. So there's a bit of an accumulative factor, but um, you know, I think that one. So if we could look at myth making and the heuristic method and you know metaphysics of the gaps, here's an example. I think that it's certainly not like a concrete theory or anything like that. Having done some of this research into, you know, the shadow, the nervous system, the paranormal, the things we talked about, I found myself like, definitely without trying, like very inadvertently, um, at least in a piece of the book, kind of settling on, again, not like the total. We don't have it fully fleshed out, but this old school idea of poltergeist and paranormal activity surrounding surges of energy. One of those surges being adolescence. When you look into the cases, I think that there actually is um, some. There's definitely plenty of case studies to suggest that something like that is going on.
I know Soraya's brought that up a few times, and I think I've talked about that with him on his show a little bit, and he definitely brought it up last time he was on our show. He's big into the poltergeist thing. So you think the poltergeist thing might be the one thing where there's some sort of phenomena happening?
Yeah, well, there's other cases. There's like poltergeists of all things are definitely the most interesting, like quote unquote paranormal, because um something like a ghost is a lot more ambiguous, but poltergeists, I have like 4 or 5 stories that in Hunt Manual that were not only like witnessed by too many people to count, like witnesses being doctors and neighbors and police officers, but just and then they also make their way to the media, and then they are, and then not only that, but they withstand the test of time and scrutiny, sometimes like decades and decades later, even under the eye of the media, and people still, with things that happened in the 70s and 80s, they're still shrugging even after trying to debunk it. Like no one knows, there's just a lot of unanswered questions with something like a poltergeist. And if you're just trying to use Occam's razor and say like, what are some of the common denominators here, you often find it with children, children that are, getting closer to becoming teenagers. They're definitely like that preteen phase, usually. And if you look at the stories,
so what, it's like an X-Man
ways,
thing before they get their full powers, or they're just getting their powers, or something like that, kind of a thing.
Yeah, man. And
they can't control it. They can't control that energy.
Yes, and again, let's bring it back to some more grounded science, like sleep paralysis. I'm talking about the exact same mechanics here. People who have this overcompensation, or who are overcompensating because of traumas and stressors that they have in their life. Our nervous system, because of our neurotic tendencies, becomes like this overflowing cup. And then again, that maybe you start drinking more, maybe you start having crazy dreams, maybe you start experiencing weird sleep paralysis events. Maybe if you have some really intense accumulative factors and traumas built up, and that butterfly effect happens in such a way, maybe you start having things emanate from your psyche that start throwing things across the room. And I would be skeptical. This is the point I'm at now. I would be skeptical of anyone that says, and I mean, quite frankly, I just simply wouldn't believe them if they told me that they had telekinesis or telekinesis. But I think that, because for me, some of the unexplainable things I've experienced, something we've talked about before, I've definitely had dreams that I cannot control that have only happened a few times in my life, dreams of the future. And I know plenty of other people who have had experiences like that. And that's, other than seeing some UFOs in the sky, that's pretty much the extent of some of my really, truly unexplainable stuff. But I mean, that alone really causes you to, I don't know, it only takes like one thing, if certain things are, for me, if I can have, if like, I don't trust people who say that they have special powers, but I certainly think that there's more than enough evidence from my personal experience and actual scientific data that people can, for lack of a better term, stumble into powerful situations.
Yeah. I mean, the human, I would agree in the sense that you can see some humans do some pretty crazy things. I mean, look at like Wim Hof. He's done some things that are definitely superhuman, like Shaolin monks. They've put them under brain scans while they're doing some of that crazy stuff that they do. So yeah, I mean, I would say that there's definitely states of consciousness you could achieve through repetition and pushing the boundaries and things like that.
Right. So what if someone had that sort of like monkly discipline that you're talking about that you could see in brain scans? Because they've certainly done those kinds of studies, and they found really interesting levels of discipline that really permeate and like affect consciousness on ways that we don't even fully understand yet. I mean, Wim Hof being a great example. And so I mean, what if that whole monkly attitude was beaten and battered around and was an emotional basket case, but still had that like monkly mental attenuation. And given what we know, like if Wim Hof can, do something as simple but profound as, what he does withstanding those temperatures, I think that we can most certainly alter our quote unquote reality, our perceptions of reality in ways that, for all intents and purposes, do alter reality, as far as we see it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I said, I want to believe in things, but again, I'm not just going to. And I know that you're similar, from a philosophical standpoint and the way you look at things, even though that you're a lot younger and ahead of most of the game at your age. I would say that there's still, I don't know. It's just hard for me to like. I get it on one end of things. Like I get the believing, because when we started this podcast, we believed in a lot more things. That's why we're doing this mysteries and metaphysics series that we're doing. It's a look at how we thought about things when we started the podcast 4 years ago versus how we look at things now. And I mean, my paradigm has shifted 3 or 4 times, and I look at things in a completely different way for the most part. I mean, some similar themes, but I believed in a lot more stuff was possible when we first started. Then when I actually read a bunch of books, did research, cross-reference things, it takes the illusion of some of these fun topics. It takes that illusion away, and you kind of see, oh, these are just human beings that had these experiences and they wrote about them, but they're still human beings. Even though they had a weird experience, they're still subject to the same flawed memory, cognitive biases, pareidolia. They're still subject. They're still human beings, So I guess for me, it's like, while I think my definition of weird is shifted, I think there's a lot of unexplainable things out there. I think there's a true fringe, meaning that there's this layer of things, call it metaphysics or whatever, layer beyond science or this material realm, that weird things happen and things that we can't explain. But I don't necessarily think that things that we've been thinking about forever, like ghosts or Bigfoot or whatever, without any sort of evolution or nuance on the topic, is getting us anywhere. It's fun, it's interesting. You might entertain yourself for a while, but I'm always about taking it to the next level. What's the next big idea? What's the next, layer to this onion or whatever? I don't know if you feel the same way.
Absolutely. I mean, that's pretty much the biggest inspiration I have behind Hunt Manual in the long run. Is like really wanted to, so obvious at this point from my point of view. So I wouldn't consider something like Sasquatch like a demon. I do think you can, under the umbrella term, I think you can associate Forteana with demonology, because demonology at large in like occultism or comparative religion doesn't mean exclusively evil. It means the shadow. It means all things that are not divine. So, I've heard some people talk about, it's not a completely foreign sentiment, but it hasn't been fleshed out very well. It just hasn't been enough time. And so, kind of wanted to throw my hat into the ring with that, because I do think that's the next step, is saying, we're never going to get anywhere looking at these things the way, what you just said exactly. Again, while I don't discourage people from doing what they want to do, this is a point I make in the book a little bit as well, where like in trying to legitimize something like cryptozoology, it seems that people wanted to take it. It has strong underpinnings in mythology. Take Yeti in Tibet, for example. That's all over Forteana, all over. And, somewhere along the line, like the 60s or 70s or whatever, I don't know the date, people definitely made a very specific shift to take that out of mythology and place all these creatures in some flesh and blood realm in order to make it more legitimate. I guess in like a similar push that ufology made, but ufology had better reasons and more data and whatnot. And I mean, the whole idea, the whole push to make cryptozoology more quote unquote like scientific has really cut its knees out from under it. It's almost completely disproven the entire um, the entire field of study. I mean, anyone, no offense anybody, but anyone that looks at the field of cryptozoology and like sees the world full of like all of these literal ghouls and monsters, I just don't
like
I
that
don't
map
even
where it
understand how you
shows
could get there.
where it shows the monster from each part of the country or the world or
Yeah.
whatever. Have you ever seen those maps where it's like, you know,
Yeah.
the Dog Man of Michigan or the
Exactly.
Yeti or
That's
the,
what
you
we
know,
got is Dog Man.
yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, when you add up all those statistics, all those stories of bits of folklore and things, like how are we not running across these things? Like how is this not a comic book?
Yeah, where are the gods?
Yeah,
It's the same concept.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I would say this though too, from like an honest standpoint, like if cryptozoology, let's say, like everybody's looking for Bigfoot mostly, right? In cryptozoology, I'm sure there's people that spread it out, whatever, but most of it's Bigfoot, right?
It's a big one.
If
Yeah.
you were gonna take cryptozoology seriously, why not go for the easiest one, which would be the Tasmanian tiger, which the last one died like 100 years ago, and there's people that claim to still see it. There's even a guy, I think his name was Forrest Gallant or something. He's like a scientist, but he's even gone to look for it and stuff like that. So it's
What about the Chupa?
I don't know
Yeah,
about that one. See that one, I think that could be many. It could be a lot of different predators that are mischaracterized as that or something like, and that's just my opinion, but I would say that the Tasmanian tiger was a real thing only 100 years ago, and people claim they still see it, and scientists say no, there's no way you could see, they're extinct. But if you were going to take cryptozoology seriously, wouldn't you go to that or like something like that we like a giant, you know, I know there's some people that look for even the giant sloths which died at the end of the last ice age or whatever, you know. So
Yeah, I'm actually I'm popping to a little section in here in my manuscript so I can rattle off a couple ones here. As you bring up a great point. Firstly, I want to say for fun, Chupacabra, yeah, that's definitely like a great example of just pure myth making because it started out like some of the biggest reports where there was like alleged pictures of Chupacabra back in the 90s and stuff. And that one's not really associated with any mythology from what I can tell. The reports came out was essentially just coyotes with mange. But I mean, it's really snowballed where so the Chupacabra, I always thought of it as that kind of coyote with mange thing where it's just like this really crazy like Sasquatch dog thing. And some people do think of it like that, but then there's other people that consider it like essentially like a reptilian.
but I remember when the reports started coming out, like it was on like Unsolved Mystery. Like back in the day, there wasn't much to get right. You just see something on TV about it or something like that. But the Chupacabra, right. I remember it being portrayed as like a little dinosaur type thing. Is kind of what it was. I remember at least
that was the third one I was gonna say. Yeah,
like not like a dino, like maybe like a little. I don't know how to explain it, like a little T-Rex mixed with like some sort of cross between like a little dinosaur and like a little Sasquatch or something.
Yeah, see, it's not even like slight variations. Like in the case of Chupacabra specifically, sometimes people are talking about radically different things, and it's kind of funny. But you know, so cryptozoology, we just took some like serious and warranted stabs at it, and then and I was going to bring up what you just brought up, and it's a very good point that there is, you know, when we're talking about like ghouls in the forest, it gets a little silly potentially, but the whole idea of looking for these animals that science has been presumptuous and considered extinct or just thought was mythology to begin with. This does happen all the time, and this actually is what cryptozoology is best for. And there's a lot of great examples of this. The African peacock being one of them. Mountain gorillas in East Africa. I mean, the platypus was considered a hoax for a long time. There's a lot of evidence to show that the jackalope, I mean, the rabbits and hares didn't have antlers, but they definitely there's a virus. I'm not sure you pronounce it, like Shope papilloma, where they have growths that look very much like they're tumors, where it looks very much like antlers, and so I mean, there's some of that in there too. There's a Vietnamese soft shell turtle, which is very crucial, or at
Are
least
those
has
the
like
ones with like the
an important role.
pointy faces? Those one, the long pointy faces, almost like a pike's face.
Yeah, yeah, and they're very like quintessential in Vietnamese mythology, and they were considered non-existent for a long time. And and then there's also Hogzillas. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of that, but it's
Hogzilla.
it's crazy though. It's wild hogs. It's boars that breed with like I guess it's just big boars breeding with each other, but somehow genetic anomalies occur. You can find pictures of them online. There have been several like headlines that people have verified and everything because people thought these were hoaxes as well.
Well, I
But
know
they're
wild hogs get aggressive and they like attack other animals and stuff like
yeah,
that.
well these quote unquote hogzillas are let's see, one here was
Or
12
pig
feet
hybrid.
12 feet long, over 1,000 pounds. This thing was like the size of a literal
Jeez.
truck.
This
Yeah.
thing's insane.
And people didn't think that existed for a long time either. People didn't think that the giant squid existed.
Yeah, I
And they
remember
finally
watching
found
that documentary where that Japanese scientist guy like spent like months in that submarine trying to see this thing. And then
Yeah.
eventually, I don't know. I think they can grow like, I don't know. I think it was like 40 to 80 feet long or something crazy like that.
Yeah, yeah, very fascinating. There's other like weird reports where we don't know. For me, I think for some people it might get like head splitting, but for me it's just super fun because when you start to look at some of this, so we just talked about some realities of cryptozoology, and we've also talked about myth making, whether it be poltergeist or cryptozoology, and then there's this weird middle ground where it's like, what is going on here? There's actually consistent reports, not like really consistent, because again, where are the gods? Where are the monsters? But there are reports of aggressive baboons hiding out in the wooded wilderness around Flagstaff, Arizona. And you can also find lots of reports of really out of place wildcats in Great Britain, specifically in North America.
I've seen stuff on that, or people like posting videos and stuff on that. I think what did I see? One was like a panther or so that could have just been like there's some actual like wildcat that could have gotten loose that people were seeing.
But people see it all the time, and it very well could just be myth making at large. But it begs the question,
because there are, I think that one, I think there is photos of like there are photos out there that look pretty reliable of like some sort of like some wild panther or a leopard or something like that.
Yeah, we know these things happen. At least
people have pets, right? Pets can get out. I mean,
yeah, but how often?
That's true. But if a couple of them got out, they could start a little thing,
They could, yeah. All of these are perfectly valid potential.
See, something like that is not that crazy to me.
That it might be. Yeah, but it's important to keep it grounded a little bit.
No, for sure. But I'm saying if you were to say one, it would be something like that as opposed to like a chupacabra or what's the other one? Like a werewolf or something like that. I mean, the other thing to think about too, and I don't know if you've thought about this with the Sasquatch, is reports of, and I think that this is in that documentary I was talking to you about, which is the idea that throughout history there have been these wild people or wild men that would live on the outskirts of towns that their hairs would grow crazy. You could barely see their face because of their beards and their hair, their long hair and everything. And just imagine seeing like some super hairy big guy come out of the woods, what, like, you know what I'm saying? But I'm being real. Like, imagine this guy, he's like a feral human. I mean, we think about humans as civilized and whatever, but we self-civilize probably. I mean, there's debate, but you could say maybe starting like Göbekli Tepe is when we started to civilize ourselves or domesticate ourselves. But imagine somebody that, or like a lineage of people that lived on the outskirts that were almost like feral people, like how we have feral cats or feral dogs. It's a feral human being,
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, that would be a credible explanation for people seeing something like that too, I would think.
Yeah, yeah. And with any sort of topic or subtopic in Forteana at large, I think it's safe to say that no like researcher is ever going to get one section. Like it's never going to be one thing like, oh, this was like an animal the whole time. Or I mean, to be fair, maybe in a case like the African peacock, it probably was just an animal the whole time. But in crazier, like unexplainable stuff, it's never going to be one thing. There's always going to be different accumulative factors. Like some people are just seeing shadows, some people are just seeing animals, some people might actually be experiencing weird stuff. And yeah, I mean, if you think that not all of those are happening on a case by case basis, then yeah, you're not getting the full picture, that's for sure.
Well, life's weird, man. I mean, let's be real. We can sit here and debunk or believe or do whatever, but life's really weird. And the fact that we're even here having this conversation over these devices is even more bizarre. So
It really is.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I don't want to diminish what anybody else has experienced or believes or whatever, but I just know from everything I've looked at, there are probable. See, I guess that's where I've shifted. I'm looking for what could be the explanation for that, as opposed to just believing that it exists. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and for any listener takeaways and things, I think that the implications probably reach beyond this, but I do think it has a lot to do with the evolutionary mechanisms of what Jung would call the shadow. And I think that that's really as far as we can take the scientific approach with these things at this point. But the common denominator with all of these things is the human experience. That's the only thing we can say for sure, like about these things. Even if there are some footprints left or whatever be the case, humans do experience these things. And if we're going to we're going to use Occam's razor to sift through this and try and find some common denominators, then I mean, our evolutionary biology and the adaptive, the pro-adaptive and maladaptive perceptions of our existence, these are the common denominators. And if you're trying to understand something unexplainable at large, whatever it be, if you're not starting with these common denominators, then none of it's going to line up. As someone that has definitely, I can say this with certainty at this point, I've definitely immersed myself in some of the most outlandish, like challenging case studies and police reports and these things. And if you stop looking at these things as separate, you really, again, like basically just to sum it up, like I said before, the idea that you can basically put Sasquatch and a lot of this Forteana under the umbrella of demonology, all that metaphysics, which is not exclusively divine. Because you do need common denominators. Otherwise, we're just going to be squabbling over semantics. And like at a certain point, the more complex you make things, I mean, you have to tie the loose ends together at some point. And we're just deviating further and further out. And people are coming up with like all these different ideas. Like what if Sasquatch teleports? What if ETs are us from the future? Yeah, all these different things. It's like, okay,
Maurice has heard rumblings.
Yeah, let's just stop for a second. And instead of like going to the extent of all this vast speculation and galactic federations and whatever else, our ancestors talking to us through paranormal events, how about we look at what we know is friggin' going on, for starters? And we know that there is a lot of grounded, tangible like use and data in something like psychoanalysis, specifically Jungian psychoanalysis, because Jung isn't the end all be all. There's a lot of different psychoanalytic models out there, but Jung is definitely a valid one. There's more than one ways to slice a pie. But things like psychoanalysis show us that there is a proverbial physics of the psyche, psychodynamics, as Freud said. This is not an old idea at all. And so, yeah, I mean, long story short, if you want to understand unexplainable phenomena, you have to start with the common denominators of the physics of the psyche. I mean, you really have to, as far as I'm concerned.
And what if, just bear with me, but there's different levels of this dangling the carrot thing, like evolutionary wise. Like, what if there are some better competing ideas than other, UFOs being one? Like, finding out that there's a Sasquatch is not going to get us to Mars or intergalactic space travel, but trying to find out if there is aliens and UFOs might, right? Because the innovation in going into that field of trying to figure that out, creating better sensors, creating faster vehicles, and airplanes and rocket ships and different things. Look at what SpaceX is doing. Like, what if that, that interest in that brings some sort of evolutionary mechanism? Then I see more of a point to the, do you get what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely.
The Bigfoot stuff and the ghost stuff might fall aside because it doesn't help us. The ghost stuff might maybe with the near-death experience stuff, or maybe life after death to some degree or whatever. But I think specifically the UFO thing, in the sense that, it's right now, it's dangling that carrot hard, and people are biting, and it might take us to that next level because of that. That's just my thought on that.
I would definitely agree with that. There's something to be said for symbols, and archetypal entities, will say, having inertia in the human, throughout time, and in the human minds, because of what they represent and the omens, that they might bear. And you just, even in any given metaphysical discipline, there are certainly hierarchies, and yeah, I mean, if you want to put things in that kind of hierarchical structure, definitely Forteana and this strange, unexplainable realm is, in many ways, seems to be somewhat of a distraction. Absolutely. Like, even in the psychological sense, like we talked about, the purgative aspect of it. I think that sometimes people take a look at these things, and they, instead of treating it in that purgative way, they make it like a holy grail. And I think that that's a serious pitfall.
And I think that it seems like I'm trying to defend UFOs, but I'll just point this out. And this is something I've observed via social media, specifically Twitter. Like, there's UFO Twitter. Shout out to UFO Twitter. I don't really participate in a lot of the arguments and debates and drama or anything like that, but I'm a watcher. I watch what's happening. I see what people are saying. I know, the little clicks, and this happens and that happens. These people think this, those people think that, blah, 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 blah. What I will say is, it seems like where you have the ghost hunter shows, they're still doing the ghost hunting stuff. Same stuff I've seen for the last 15 years or whatever, however long it's been on TV. Same thing with the, the Sasquatch stuff. UFO people that are interested in the topic are talking about, like, parallaxes and different camera effects, and they're learning things that actually apply to, like, military FLIR. Like, most people, if there wasn't UFO stuff, wouldn't know what a FLIR pod was, or this forward-looking infrared systems on these fighter jets, or how they work, and different things. So I think that alone in itself shows you kind of what I'm talking about, where there's this evolution of thought happening within that community, where as some of the other ones seem to just be doing the same old stuff, if that makes sense.
I would completely agree. And yeah, I mean, things like the paranormal and cryptozoology,
and again, I'm
extremely stale.
I'm not talking shit. Again, do your thing. This is just a purely observation, and if I'm wrong, point me in the direction of something that can prove I'm wrong. I love learning new things, but that's just, again, just my perception and the way I've seen all this stuff go down. So,
well, along with the the purgative sentiments and the fact that some of this can be like a deviation from some of the more important truths of life, or even some of the more important questions, I think that there's it would be a shame to not mention the whole like surrealist quality and the fact that some of these things seem to play with the psyche on purpose. There's very much, when you look into the paranormal, and for me, this is how things like ufology, some of the only ways that things like ufology tie into this overall Fortean definition, because another part of the Fortean definition is the fact that some of these things have, or not some of them, pretty much all of them, if you look hard enough, for the most part, they have this sardonic sort of, again, trickster, prankish, tongue-in-cheek, like they're laughing at you, like their very presence is a cosmic joke, and you're the punchline. And that's very much a strong running belief, might be a strong word, tenet might be a strong word, but that's a really strong running theme in Fortean investigation in general. And you can see it with the paranormal all the time. You can see it a bit with UFOs as well.
I was going to say psychedelic realms, same thing.
Absolutely.
I know Terrence McKenna's machine elves might have been a creation of an archetype in itself, but I think that idea that people see jesters or tricksters or whatever in these psychedelic realms is definitely some sort of manifestation. Is it external? Is it the subconscious? Is it both? Is it, what's going on?
Yeah, whatever is going on, it's clearly, at least in part, something, a participation of our psyche. And it's something that people, if they're interested in any of these things, the paranormal and cryptozoological especially, you really have to understand that this is a crux of it all. If you haven't wrapped your head around the trickery of all of this, because well, then you're not going to have wrapped your head around the full picture. It's a two-way street where not only could it potentially, the more you look into it, not only could it potentially be that this phenomena is actually kind of setting us up as a punchline potentially, but it also is just as simple as the fact that, we can't even really trust our own eyewitness accounts most of the time, it seems. So, I mean, in many ways, we're our own tricksters, man.
I mean, you get that a lot too from people's trip reports, that we're all basically actors participating in this like Greek drama, that we call life, and that everybody's just playing their part, and some people might seem evil or this or good or whatever, but we're all just playing some sort of role, which is interesting, because you do hear that from a lot of people, or at least a lot of different trip reports.
I think there's some truth to that for sure.
So let's wrap it up here, because I do want to do a short Patreon episode. I think we could. I haven't really discussed this with anybody, but I think you'd be a good person to. Would be like Egregors.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, if you want to talk about that for 15 or so minutes on our Patreon segment, we can do that. But
that'd be great.
So do you want to plug anything before we get out of here, other than your book, or?
I mean, go check out the homie Joe Roop's show, Lighting the Void. I've been doing some work helping him get guests up on there. I do some co-hosting on Mondays sometimes. I mean, other than that, you can go check out some of the shows over on the network, the Fringe FM there. I'm loosely affiliated, helping Joe out a bit, and getting further into some of the administrative stuff over there. But I mean, other than that, other than helping good old Joe Roop out, I mean, I'm really focused on this book, and that'll be coming out Halloween. And I mean, that's pretty much it. Just keep an eye out for I got some guest spots. I'm going to be going on Soraya's show, Where'd the Road Go, in the future here. I'm going to be going back on Miguel's show, Aeon Bite, and I'm going to be making the rounds with some of the other homies. So talking about a lot more crazy stuff. So keep your eyes peeled. And divemind.net, of course. You can find me on Facebook or Twitter. Sweet. I mean, that's really it. Yeah, if you like what I do, I appreciate the support, whether it's just interaction or, buying the book or sharing it around. I mean, thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you got a little bit out of it.
Oh, people are pissed, bro. They want us to believe. They are pissed. No, but seriously, go check out Anthony's new book. Pre-order it. It comes out on Halloween. It's called Hunt Manual, 21st Century Demonology in Forteana. And
I'll say real quick.
Yeah, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you.
No, go ahead.
I just want to say the pre-order is Kindle because that's the only setup you can do. But it will be by Halloween. There will be a paperback and hardcover out. So you keep your eyes peeled for that too. Yeah.
Sounds good. And again, I'll have the link down below if you're interested in buying that. We are about to do a Patreon segment where we're going to talk about egregors. So if you're interested, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/MindEscapePodcast. For just $2 a month, you'll get exclusive guest episodes and segments. I think we've done a few with Anthony on there, talking about UFOs and different weird phenomena, good versus evil, philosophy, all sorts of stuff. We also recently uploaded, segment with Rick Strassman, one with Matthew Clark, where we discussed Eleusinian mysteries, one with Laura from Megalith Hunter, Laird Scranton. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff on there. I mean, if we've had some pretty good guests in the past, you can bet that we've probably done a Patreon with them. So go check that out. We're also on Discord if you want to find us on there and chat. If you're interested, head on over to indrasweb.org and sign up for an account today. This is a social media platform we created to connect open minds. Again, trying to get in the App Store, and I'll let you know when that happens. And also, if you're interested in winning a Mind Escape t-shirt, we are going to do a giveaway at the end of October. The only thing you have to do to enter is leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, take a screenshot of it, and send it to our email at mindescapepodcast@gmail.com, and I will enter you to win at the end of the month, or I'll enter you for a chance to win at the end of the month, I should say.
Yeah.
And also, we have a new merch store, so we have some pretty sweet designs. I designed one of the Portara of Naxos. It's a pretty sweet shirt. There's one that says #Let Maurice Speak with a silhouette of our man Maurice.
It's a top seller.
And we got some other stuff in there. So we got some cool shirts. And also, if you're interested in creating a shirt for our T Public merch store, let us know. There's a thing you can go on there and create some fan art. So that's pretty cool. But I'm going to keep posting stuff on there too. So we'll have some other merch on there in the future. But yeah, there's t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, all sorts of stuff on there. So go check it out. I have the link down below, and that's it. Really appreciate you coming on, Anthony, and we'll definitely have you back on in the future. And everybody go buy his book, read it, and creep yourself out.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem, man. Everybody stay safe out there. We love everybody, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.
Peace.